everyone. Good morning. How are you this morning? My name is Karen Tucker. I'm the CEO of the Churchill Club. Welcome to this program called Question of Publicness. We're fortunate to have with us Jeff Jarvis and Phil Bronstein. Jeff teaches entrepreneurial journalism at CUNY. He has a great new book, hot off the presses, called Public Parts, How Sharing in the Digital Age Improves the Way We Work and Live. We also have with us Phil Bronstein of Hearst Newspapers. Both of these gentlemen are legendary journalists and, in fact, one-time colleagues. Jeff and Phil, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. And I would also like to thank our sponsor and host, Skype. What a great place to be here at Skype's North American headquarters. It's very, very cool, and we really appreciate you hosting it. Thank you. And I would also like to acknowledge and thank our co-host, Privacy, Identity, Innovation. They have a significant event, PII 2011 Venture Forum, coming up on November 15th. So check that out at PII2011.com. And our group, Churchill Club, is a 26-year-old nonprofit forum dedicated to encouraging innovation and economic growth. Check out our upcoming schedule of programs at churchillclub.org. And my last announcement, if you are tweeting this morning, please do use #Churchill Club. Our distinguished interviewer, Phil Bronstein, is Director of Content Development and Editor-at-Large for Hearst Newspapers. In addition to his work to develop new content partnerships, he writes a weekly San Francisco Chronicle column, he blogs, and much more. Read his full bio in your program this morning for further details. I thought you might be interested in what Phil's answer to my question about his favorite business book. He mentioned The Soccer War by Kapuscinski, and but to him, the best business books are really the ones that tell us about culture. He drove all the way from Marin this morning in less than 48 hours ago. He was in Russia, so we really appreciate the special effort that he made to be with us this morning. Please welcome Phil.
Thanks, Karen. I noticed in the bathroom that there's a shower, so if things really get messy here, we can go clean up. Thank you to the Churchill Club and to Jeff for being here, and to Skype. Perhaps we should have done this remotely. It would have been more appropriate, but we're happy to be here. Jeff and I were essentially journalist cubs, sort of together at the old Examiner. One of us, it was misspent youth, and that person went on to be a bureaucrat. But Jeff went on to be an extraordinarily prominent journalist. As Karen pointed out, he was to give you an idea of how ahead of the time it was, he was the founding editor of the Entertainment Weekly, which I think was a little bit ahead of its time in terms of tapping into that aspect of our culture. And he was an associate publisher of the New York Daily News, a TV critic for TV Guide and People, columnist for the Examiner, worked at the Chicago Tribune. And he also previously wrote the book, What Would Google Do?, which is a question that even still today is big and battleship-like as Google is. We would like to know the answer to that question. He recently wrote a blog about what would Apple do, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Jeff is like the Jeremiah of media. He's out there telling us what our sins are and telling us how we might be able to fix them. So if keep with the biblical references, if those of us in the legacy media fancy ourselves as the high priests, Jeff is the Antichrist.
Tweet that.
He's very evangelical about his beliefs about an open society, and he and a few other great pioneers at the University of New York, Clay Shirky and Jay Rosen and others, are really on the sort of cutting edge of telling us and explaining to us why publicness, or the publics as he calls them in his book, are so important to us. And of course, being in the legacy media still at Hearst, I would like to know how we're going to make money from that. So
take
Jeff,
my class.
Take your class. Well, in fact, Jeff, what's interesting is you practice what you preach, which is not always true in our profession. And Jeff Jarvis's bio that I got, the bio itself is this top paragraph. And the rest of the page and another page are full disclosures of everything. So Jeff talks about his business ties, his media ties, the stocks he owns, his religion, his medical issues, his politics.
TMI.
Well, that's really a question, Jeff. It seems like that's a lot. It's a lot for you to have to do. You basically say in your book that businesses should do the same, should be transparent as possible, and maybe as confessional as possible. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the person or institution that's doing it, and it's a lot of work for the audience.
The latter you can speak to. The former, that's what I heard, Phil, when it came to blogs. And editors and writers would say, I'm too busy for this. I'm doing what I do. And I would try to convince them that, in fact, the blog was a way to make your life better, your job easier, your job better. That by becoming open, you become collaborative with people. And by becoming open, you gain trust with people that enables that collaboration. And I think that's what I've found as a journalist, what I've found as an individual when I revealed things, I've gotten good out of it. And for companies, I think it's a wise way to do business, and for governments, it's a moral necessity.
So, well, I mean, there are a lot of interesting quotes in the book about the moral aspects of being transparent, and which doesn't quite explain Snooki. I mean, we do live in this culture where the confessional is really, sort of at the pinnacle of success and of audience. And I'm wondering if you see that kind of confessional and that kind of sharing and that kind of transparency is really sort of perversion of what it is you're talking about, or an extension of it.
Whenever I'm asked for a sound check, they usually say, what did you have for breakfast? And I say that ever since the invention of Twitter, I refuse to say that anymore, because you're not going to catch me like a Twitter user saying that I had an apple turnover for breakfast. I'm not saying that everything must be shared. It's noise. I don't disagree with that. There's noise there. But there are a lot of reasons to share a lot. And so, I try to think that everything I share has some reason to be shared. I think that companies need to operate the same way, where we default to this notion in an industrial economy that secrecy was our value. And that can happen, Pache Steve Jobs. But in general, I think that companies need to be open more so that they can collaborate. Now, sometimes I'll hear people say, well, my secrets will be taken away. And this is a world filled with secrets. By the way, you signed an NDA here related to what you eat at Skype, but not about anything I say. My life is an open blog. Companies, if they are more open, are going to change their relationship with the public. And rather than thinking that their value is tied up in secrecy, their value is actually tied up in the relationships they have with people. And the relationships are going to come with customers the more open they are. That's the formula.
So, you mentioned Apple, and you've blogged about Apple since Steve Jobs passed away. What people say about Apple, there was actually a quote in The Economist, and I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but essentially is most entrepreneurs try and figure out where people are and get there and try and help them be there and make money off of them. Steve Jobs got there first. He sort of understood what the trajectory was, but he did it in a cloistered environment.
I've written 2 books, not to plug the other one, What Would Google Do, now out in paperback. I set forth a bunch of rules of how I thought Google saw the world. And I have a bunch of rules here about what I think is necessary for publicness. Steve Jobs violates every single one of those rules. And how could he do it? How could he do it? Because he's just that damn good. And what he made was so high. He had one rule above all others, which was quality. The quality will win. And yes, if you are that good, if you are that amazing, you can succeed in that way, but that's rare, let's be honest.
So good at what, though? I mean, was he good at understanding in advance where people were going? Was he good at understanding human nature? Because one would argue that reputationally he maybe wasn't that good in that area. What was he good at?
No, that's really interesting because, some would accuse Mark Zuckerberg of trying to change human nature, where when I talk to Mark, he argues that to the contrary, he's enabling human nature, that sharing is an innate human desire. And so I put the same question out of Jobs. Was he just enabling human nature, or was he in fact changing us? It's a good question. I don't know. I think that even as brilliant as he was, and I am a great admirer of his, he probably was not changing human nature, but was indeed enabling it. What did he do? He enabled all of us to become creators. You know, when I started Entertainment Weekly, my wife was our Mac genius, who was the first national magazine set up on Macs, and Quark, this amazing new thing. And there was a lot of ugly crap that came out of Quark at first, right? But the essential tool of creation that the Mac enabled, and the tools on that platform enabled, sparked an incredible growth of design quality and products and other things. So I think what Jobs really did was, in the end, even though he wouldn't listen to us, he did respect us.
You know, obviously, Apple momentarily became the most valuable company in the world, may get there yet again. But you talk about people who are concerned about the creepiness of the big brother aspect, the creepiness of companies like Facebook. And you seem to have, as you say, a lot of faith in Mark Zuckerberg, a lot of faith in Steve Jobs, excuse me, a lot of faith in Google. And maybe as long as you have people like Steve Jobs running those companies, or Eric Schmidt's no longer there running the company, but Sergey and Larry running Google, and Mark Zuckerberg running Facebook, you do not have this problem. But if somebody like Vladimir Putin comes along and takes over Facebook, you could have a big problem because of the huge amounts of information they have about all of us. I mean, doesn't it sort of rely on who's there and whether they live up to their motto of, do no evil?
But that's where transparency also comes in. Eric Schmidt has often said that if Google violates the trust that people have in it, people can leave to other services that are equally as good in every one of their offerings tomorrow. And I think they are intensely aware of that at Google, that if they really screw up with us, we'll leave. Not very likely, but possible. Yes, but I think that what we need to do is talk about larger principles. I mean, at the end of the book, we'll probably get to this, I go on to principles of an open society and business. But just in terms of a company's principles and how that operates, I think what we're doing is getting knickers and knots about these technology companies as if they are, and everything they do is new and special. It really isn't. If you get to the idea of your personal data and cookies and the things people have demonized, do not track bills coming up. I teach the founding of Entertainment Weekly in my entrepreneurial class, and I looked at this term, I looked at the budget again, and it struck out at me that we had list rental. Right? And in magazines, we sold your name and the fact that you read this magazine with your address to lots of people. And if we said that today, if you said, oh, well, the San Francisco Chronicle is going to sell your name and address and what you read at the Chronicle, there'd be an outcry, properly so. But we did all of this going back in media for a long time. And when you gave to NPR, there's a reason you started getting hip ads the next week in the mail, because they thought you were a demographic and that's what they were going to do for you. So what I'm saying is that we tend to demonize technology, and we can talk about that more in a second, and worry that this is all new. When in fact, we already have laws that deal with identity theft and fraud and these areas. And those laws are just as valid online as they are in any other way, and online isn't really reinventing things terribly in that way.
But what may be new, Jeff, is the amount of information. Because it's one thing, name and address, private, okay? So a lot of people consider that to be private and would be offended today, and maybe would have been offended had there been much more transparency with magazines. But today, the amount of information, including medical, including all kinds of personal information, is conceivably available. And you feed this beast with all this information. And I think so. It's a question of scope, not so much as a concept.
But in the end, yes, there are new issues that come up with, whenever somebody says the word database, they always start with massive. Databases are always big data. And big data is scary, like big companies. Okay, and there are new things that emerge from that possibility. But again, we have to come back to the use and the harm. Right? Part of the problem with this discussion about privacy is that it's very gushy. When I tried to define privacy in the book, I found it very difficult. I actually started with Mark Zuckerberg's definition about control and realized that was inadequate. And if you dig through on privacy, what you find is that fear about privacy often comes coincident with a new technology that is disruptive. The Gutenberg press caused earliest authors to fret about having their thoughts put down with their names permanently and spread widely. Jonathan Swift has a great line from the time saying that a book of verses kept in a drawer and shown to a few is like a virgin much sought after. But a book once published is like a common whore anyone can buy for 2 crowns. There was fear about this notion of being exposed. The first discussion, serious discussion of a legal right to privacy in the US. Mind you, privacy is not guaranteed in the Constitution. Publicness is in the First Amendment, but privacy is not. The first major discussion came in 1890 with the invention of the Kodak camera and the rise of the horrible penny press, our mutual corporate predecessors. And the fear that people were suddenly going to be able to take your picture anywhere and everyone could see it, and oh my God, what happens with that? That's new, and that's big, and that's scary. And in fact, the New York Times at the time had lines about fiendish Kodakers lying in wait. And President Teddy Roosevelt banned Kodaking in Washington parks for a time because he feared his picture being taken. So now we're at a point where there are new possibilities with data and such. Yes, that's true. But we have to hold to the principles of law we already have in place, I think. We have to remind ourselves that things are in some ways extremely different, in other ways not. We still have these principles of law there. And my fear about the fear of privacy is that we turn around and we could limit the benefits of publicness. And that's really what I was trying to write about here, is that yes, it's important, privacy is important, it needs protectors. We do need to worry about what could happen that's bad. We need to protect against that. But if that is all we do, if all we ever do is look at the worst case, then we don't see the best case. This is the valley of the best case.
Well, to your point, I think now we have Google Earth View, and not Earth View, but Street View.
Right.
And the concerns people have about blurring out their photos. So things are not so different. And things are not so different in the Gutenberg analogy, too, because Gutenberg went bankrupt. So here he invented this technology that changed the world extraordinarily, but he went bankrupt. And so now we fast forward to today, great, let's disrupt things, let's innovate, let's invent things, but how do we make money from it?
I got obsessed with Gutenberg doing the research for the book, so I actually wrote another piece for Wired Germany that I'm probably going to put online here on Gutenberg as the original technology entrepreneur. Let me just do a second on that. Because what's fascinating is he did go bankrupt. What did him in was his cash flow and his cap table. I'm teaching Gutenberg now in my entrepreneurial class because the parallels to current businesses are really quite striking. He had to tackle incredible technology difficulties to get where he got to. He was highly secretive. He did things in different places so it wouldn't be discovered, like Colonel Sanders. He was a perfectionist like Steve Jobs. The original Bible was just incredibly beautiful. The problem was, just as the Bible was ready to come off the press and be sold to get his cash flow in, his funder put a call on the money and got the business as a result. Because some people say the funder was a schmuck, but that's a debate for the centuries. So you go forward to today, was Gutenberg, part of the interesting about Gutenberg is that after he lost the business, he then went from very secret to open. And it was because he was very open that he basically spread printing around the world, Herr Fust. Right? And he had an incredible impact then on society that I think is being rivaled for the first time by the internet. So the disruption is great. But the other great lesson about Gutenberg, finally, is that Elizabeth Eisenstein, who is the key scholar on Gutenberg, says that the book did not take on its own form until about 50 years after its invention. It was originally called automated handwriting. The fonts mimicked scribal fonts in handwriting. The content of the books was much the same. The business model was the same. It took 50 years. It took 100 years, she says, for the full impact of the book on society to be felt and recognized. Well, I think we're at about the year 1467 in our current progression. And we can argue that we're in faster years than Gutenberg years. But look at what publishers are doing with the iPad you have here. They're putting old wine in new casks. They're trying to recreate their old models, the product, the control they have over it, the business model, and everything, and say, oh, good, you've given me back control that Link took away from me. Well, bull. It's not the case. It's not the way it's going to be. We haven't yet gotten our imaginations going sufficiently to reimagine what content is. And whether content, by the way, is where the full value is. I had a discussion at lunch a few weeks ago with the former head of a network news operation who said, Jarvis, he said, Facebook and Google use our steel, media steel, to make their cars. And Mark Zuckerberg doesn't really value our content. And I thought about it and I said, I think you got exactly the opposite. The only content you value is the content you make because you're a content person. Mark Zuckerberg values the content from everyone and sees the value in it. And the value in it is not the content so much. The content is a tool, it is a magnet, but the value in there is the relationships and the data about them. And so Zuckerberg and Google are making money in this new media world because they see the world differently. One more quick story. When I went to interview Mark, I took my son, Jake, who's now a sophomore at Tufts and a developer, and Zuckerberg is his hero. And so I made good dad points for taking him. And as we drove up to the headquarters here in Palo Alto, Jake said, you know, the wall is something entirely new. And I played that back to Zuckerberg, and he disagreed. And he said, no, we've always signaled, but I'm going to side with my son here. Because my son said, on the wall, you have a conversation in public, and that's new. And I realized as soon as he said that, oh, I'm looking at the wall in my old media eyes, thinking it's a place to publish or to broadcast content. It's not. It's something different. So my argument here is that it's fine to say that this disruption comes, your damned internet comes along, Jarvis. I've heard this for years now. What are you going to do about supporting a newsroom? Well, I'm trying to start people creating new companies now. And I think it's possible to remake an old company and to bring them in. It's going to be a much smaller operation. It's going to be a very different operation. I think it's possible. I think that those companies have to learn how to play well with others in networks and ecosystems. But I think that the future of media and content and news and those things that we care so deeply about is bright, but is going to come from ways you and I can't even predict today.
So you consult still for some legacy media companies, including Newhouse. What are you telling them? They own newspapers, they own magazines. Presumably they're still doing things in kind of the legacy way. So what is it? I mean, not that we want to get your advice here for free that you charge them for, but since you've already charged them, we'll piggyback. Sort of like, you know, search portals piggyback on our content. But
oh, so bitter. No, they actually send you value with audience. You just have to know what to do with it.
We haven't been able to monetize the audience. All right, so...
that's not their fault, it's your fault. But that's okay, that's another discussion.
That's where we agree. So what are you telling Newhouse? How do they change?
I do give this advice away for free because we did research at CUNY on this, and I looked at new business models for news where we modeled out 2 years ago what Boston looks like if the globe had folded, which at the time looked likely. And what we see is that there's an ecosystem already emerging. Right? There's a lot of different players who are involved in the media for their own reasons. And we found bloggers across the country from New York to Seattle that are bringing in 200,000 plus a year, serving towns of 60,000 people. And they're just journalists who don't know how to sell. So we saw, how do you optimize that? The main way you optimize it, I think, is by joining networks. So you can aggregate audience up of value to a larger advertisers. And you also sell other things. In Brooklyn, events are very big. The Bronstein blog in Brooklyn makes his business now running a flea market. Well, not too different from running classified ads, or block parties, or whatever. So we saw a world where there's a lot of independent entrepreneurial ventures, and then there's also a new news organization that sits there that does do metro-wide reporting, that does do sales for that network and benefits from the existence of the network, and it's more efficient because the network is there, because it doesn't have to do everything. It can now link to things. It now recognizes the link economy. You know, as I think about this at a broader scale, I think we see the notion of an industry made up of vertical corporations replaced by the ecosystem. And in the ecosystem, I see three layers. I'm speaking to the choir here. There's the platform layer. The platform enables the entrepreneurial layer, but the entrepreneurs are separate and disparate and need to come together in networks to get critical mass. So there's a platform layer, an entrepreneurial layer, and a network layer. And I think that news organizations have to decide where they are in that. Now, news organizations could be a platform for our communities. But if we are that, we don't just make content. We enable the community to do what it wants to do. We enable the community to become like the internet, end to end, and share things directly. And we add value to that, as Andy Carvin has done with NPR and the Arab Spring Online. We could be entrepreneurial and invest in all of our former reporters starting their own businesses. We could be the network layer, and we could put these people in networks together to do things collaboratively and to sell ads collaboratively. We have to rethink our position in a new ecosystem of business.
In terms of the new ecosystem for, say, professional journalists, you mentioned C-ClickFix in your book. And C-ClickFix was something that I was very interested in when they started up at Yale, and they weren't at Yale, they were in New Haven. because we had been doing something called Chronicle Watch, which is basically pothole fixing, but we were the pass-through. So people would call us up or email us or let us know that there was a pothole on their street or there were wiring problems in their kids' public school, and we would run a small picture of the problem, thumbnail, and a picture of the public official whose job it was to fix it or wasn't fixing it, and their contact information. We'd run it every day until they fixed it. This, for a long time, was the most popular feature in the Chronicle because it allowed people to participate in...
You were a platform for the community.
Platform.
Right.
You say in the book, though, and we were accused in our own newsroom of being bullies. You know, it's oversimplification, you're bullying, it's only a graphic, what are you talking about? You say, you talk about self-centered residents see it as a chance to play gotcha with do-nothing public officials. Why shouldn't they play gotcha with if the public officials are being paid to do something and they're doing nothing?
All I'm suggesting is this, is that if, this is Larry Lessig's point from Harvard Law School now, that if all we do in transparency in government is play gotcha, and there's plenty of gotcha to be played, there's plenty of bastards to be caught with red hands. No argument, Your Honor. But if that's all we do, then we're going to not encourage government to open up more because we're using openness as a weapon against government, and it's not going to align the interests. Whereas the neat thing about See, Click, Fix is that there's another opportunity here. So the park bench isn't fixed. Yeah, you can spend that to beat the head over the park official who ought to do it, but the park official's running out of money and he's trying to do other things, and maybe he doesn't have the money to do it. And along comes a citizen who says, I got a hammer, I'll fix it. Well, can we rethink society in those terms more collaboratively? Right, so all I'm suggesting in that opportunity is that there are also opportunities created with open information always to collaborate, and that we as citizens can look at it that way. And I think that's what we see in part in the spirit, certainly of the Arab Spring, of the remaking of the Icelandic constitution using Facebook, and Occupy Wall Street. And that frustrates people because they don't have a clear leadership and a clear message, but that's the whole point. It's not an institution, it's a hashtag revolt. It has started up around an idea and a notion, and people are filling in their own ends to that. And that's a new structure for society. And again, we're just trying to figure out now.
You tried to start a hashtag revolt, and I remember that weekend was sort of watching with great interest to see it take shape. I don't know, are we allowed to?
Can we say a bad word?
Can we say a bad word? Jeff had something called Fuck Washington.
Fuck you, Washington.
Fuck you, Washington. As the hashtag, and the idea was to capitalize, not just capitalize, but to congregate all the hostility and anger over inefficiency and inaction in Washington. And it didn't, I mean, did it take off? It didn't.
Well,
why did that?
First, I must confess that I violated my own Cabernet rule in the book, is that one should never allow friends to tweet, blog, Google Plus, or anything else after too much nice red wine, which I did. But I came in after watching the news and having a little too much Cabernet.
And confessed to that.
I confessed to it and said, you know, I'm just pissed off. And I said, in Twitter, I said, you know, fuck you, Washington. It's our economy, it's our money, and I couldn't get the debt deal going. And I said, we ought to do a chant, because I'm, you know, you now hear the alcohol talking. And someone said, you idiot, it's not a chant, it's a hashtag. And I said, right. And so I put a hashtag in, fuck you, Washington. Now, people yell at me because I didn't say GOP or Congress or the, you know, the particular dastardly deeds. But what I learned, I always learn from this stuff, what I learned even in that was that it was a blank slate, much like Occupy Wall Street, where I said, fuck you, Washington, and people said, yeah, for making my parents nervous about whether they can pay their bills next month, for not letting me marry who I want, for not being able to negotiate like a 3-year-old. And it became this gathering point for the people to say what they wanted to say, why they wanted to say F you, Washington. And I think that's where Occupy Wall Street is too. And the interesting thing about a hashtag to me is that no one owns it. It brings no credo. It brings no structure. That is the architecture we have. You know, and this goes back to Larry Lessig too. I think that what we're starting to see is society beginning to mimic the architecture of the net. Go to news. Arab Spring. People, Andy Carvin at NPR didn't say to people in Tahrir Square, hey folks, would you like to crowdsource your revolution? You ought to use Twitter. They were using it on their own because they needed to, right? Witnessed the world end to end, just like the architecture of the net. Andy, as a journalist, stood above and looked and picked out the good things and debunked rumors and vetted people who were there and added incredible value to that. But the architecture...
Pitney did the same thing, I think, on Huffington Post.
Yes, exactly. And so there's journalistic value to add to a structure that already created because the platform enabled the community to share the information on their own. And that's where I see things going now, where maybe society is mimicking the architecture of the internet, or maybe the internet is finally the first technology able to catch up with the proper architecture of society.
You mentioned the dumping of content by legacy media, that they didn't understand the subtleties, not even so subtle differences that the platform allows you to do. This was the 15 plus years ago. This was the criticism going onto the web, of newspapers going onto the web. I had some conversations the other day with some angel investors down here. These people like Mike Maples, who are paid, early in Twitter, early in Facebook, et cetera, and are paid to sort of see over the horizon a little bit. And what they said is, social for us is over. As venture capitalists, as angel investors who need to get at the next big wave first. Social still has lots of venture possibilities, but for people like us, it's over. So what's the next thing? And the next thing was basically removal of the middleman, which is something you talk about in this book. So they see the web, in a sense, as a 15-year failed experiment. It's bad user experience, bad advertiser experience. Now along comes the iPad and other tablets, and you can conceivably have sort of beautifully rendered ads and beautifully rendered.
It's all HTML5, man.
Fancy. Okay, so it's all HTML5. But so what they're saying is, you essentially are going to be. It's not going to be the general public or a company that gathers this stuff together. It's going to be you. You're the person who does it together with technology that is currently, being invented, that has been invented. There's a company called My Sixth Sense, which basically it's artificial intelligence that goes in your RSS feed and reorders it based on your actual practice. And then so you'll just have a device, probably more contemporary than this one.
Yeah, I'm ashamed of you, Phil.
I'm ashamed for myself. and this is an upgrade for me. But it'll just have buttons on it. It'll say news, for instance, or technology, or whatever it'll say. And the content that's on there will be the content that you yourself have chosen in a certain way together with technology. And so all these aggregators will go away. That includes newspapers, that includes everybody who sort of aggregates and bundles for a living. So as a newspaper, for instance, it's a bundle. I sell you a bundle. If I'm selling you an iPad app, it's not an iPad app where you've said, here's what I want. It's an iPad where we say, here's what we're bundling, and we're going to charge you for it. And that is ultimately doomed to failure.
Yeah, and I think the notion that social's over is it's the kind of thing you hear out here and hear in blogs and Twitter is somebody declares something, it's new, it's taking over the world, it's over, and that cycle's about 3 days.
But you're pretty enamored of new things yourself.
Oh, I am, but I don't tend to kill them as early as others. I love Robert Scoble dearly. I'm surprised he's not here because he's everywhere. He is our Zelig, right? But Robert will get really enthused about something, and then he'll get so deeply into it that he'll get tired of it, and then he'll think maybe is it over now, and then he finds his stasis with it, right? And that's what I think the rest of us do. He's just ahead of us. Social is never over because social is us. We just have new ways to do it, right? The earliest renditions of social were very simplistic, things like that, and we're getting more nuanced in how we do this. I argue that. We talked about this before the session started, that the Senate is way behind in calling Eric Schmidt on the carpet for search. Search is yesterday's war. Search is over, man. And I don't think it's even social now. What I argue is that the current war is over signal generation. And that Facebook and Google and Twitter and others want us to generate signals about ourselves. We can get to the creepy part of that in a second. But who we are, where we are, what we're doing, what we like, what we buy, who we know, where we're going, where we've been, all these things enable them to target better their content and services and advertising to us, to give us relevance. And relevance is where the high value is. And they also might argue that that's serendipity. Serendipity is not randomness. I think it's the contrary. It's unexpected relevance. Now, who can provide that relevance to us? Well, our friends do. And I think the important thing about the F8 conference and Mark's presentation there, besides timeline, was the media vision that he has that says, in the future of media, I think, well, go to the past of media. Media was all about brands. You had to go to the brand. You had to go buy the newspaper, the magazine, watch the show. That's the way media operated. Then came search. Search flipped it around. The user asked a question. If you have an answer, you're there. Now comes the John Henry moment of humans taking over for the algorithm, which is sharing. Sharing becomes, to me, the next primary means of discovery and distribution in media. And that's why the Washington Post, The Guardian, and the Wall Street Journal even, are on Facebook that you're going to share there. So who all gives you this kind of value? The problem, as Clay Shirky says, who's actually my competitor at NYU, I'm at CUNY, but I have to quote Clay once a day, it's a law. Clay talks about
yours.
His. It's my law because Clay would never do that. Is what he calls filter failure. Right? The argument that we have too much information, we've always had too much information, and the problem we're all solving is filter failure. We in media solved it in a certain way through brands, through saying we're going to package everything, bundle it, come to us. And that's the way the means of production or distribution required us to do it. Then came search, which was a way that the algorithm did it. Now we come to people doing it. And so are there going to be aggregators? Yes, they're going to be algorithmically aided. There'll be people who will emerge who are really good at finding the good stuff. Right? What's TechCrunch but that? Right? They go find the good stuff for us. There's still a model there that works fine. And it's going to be a mix of things. But again, you have to ask, where's the value in that? Is the value in the content? Is the value in the information? Information becomes a commodity. Or is the value in knowing enough so that you can serve people better? So let's go back to local news for a moment. One of the greatest signals, we could be a great signal generator because we know where you are, we know what interests you, we know all kinds of things about you. But we have no structure to capture that. We have no structure to use that in our content or in advertising because we're just not built that way. It's not the way we think. If you're Facebook or Google, that's the way you think. And so that's why you got to ask, what would Google do?
So, in your great pitch for publicness or Publix, you say people we don't know are just fellow citizens or future friends. One might add, or creeps, or stalkers, or serial killers, or, I think it's not, you present, I think, a pretty rosy picture of this era of openness that you're...
I'm going to go to the city afterwards. You know what? There's going to be creepy people who haven't bathed in a week there, and who say wacky things. Do I throw out San Francisco as a result? No, I walk past.
No, but you don't want to be in the room necessarily.
But the internet is not a medium. See, the worldview you're bringing to this, typical for a media person, is godlike. You see the world in your own image. Right? People think the internet is a medium that should be edited and packaged just like we used to do. And if it isn't, it's a failure. It's not. The internet is life. Life is full of bozos. The internet is full of bozos. It follows. And so what you're trying to do, the filter failure question, is you're trying to filter out the bozos. And we are, in our norms and customs in society, in real life, we're accustomed to walking by the poor person who needs their meds. Online, we have to find the mechanism. We have Matt Cutts at Google who does it for us. And that's how we operate. So no, I'm not suggesting that everyone you meet is going to be wonderful. Quite the contrary. But if you don't meet people, if you choose not to meet people, you never know what you've lost.
Right, but my point is going in a slightly different direction. Then we'll have some Q&A. The fact is that we had an issue a while ago where some people were killed. One guy was killed in Hawaii, sucked into a blowhole, and drowned, and some people slipped and fell in Yosemite and died at the falls. And the comments were extraordinarily vicious. And, my feeling at the time, maybe as an old media personality with still all the baggage of old media, is there a way, maybe can we take a scalpel to this? Is there, and should there be any kind of filtration system? In some cases it's been, let's do these things through Facebook registration, because that's a filter. So there are filters out there. There are filters that are being used by these companies that you revere. And should there be, some form of filtration that does happen?
That's the value you could potentially add. When I started comments on articles and forums and newspaper sites, I originally had this rather laissez-faire attitude that, well, it's speech, man, let it go. And I quickly learned that didn't work, that this was the Rudy Giuliani broken glass syndrome, that if you let people spray graffiti on the wall and nothing happens, they will only spray more graffiti on the wall. And so you have an obligation as the mayor of the town to come in and clean it up. And so I do believe that you have to not feed the trolls and kill the trolls online, yes. You'll never be fully successful. Just ask Matt Cutts at Google who gets rid of spam there. And so we're going to try always to make better and better systems to do this. Will real identity solve it? No, it won't solve it. I do think that Facebook's key insight was real people, real relationships, and that has improved the course of discourse online. But it's not a cure-all either, because you and I both know people by name who are assholes. So just having their real name doesn't do it.
Transparent and please name them.
Name a few.
Which reminds me, you do say in the book, and it's like your bio, it's full of revelation, and you talk about the medical issues, your prostate cancer, and all the details of that, but you won't quite give and you say what you're paid by certain people, but you leave the rest to someone's imagination. So salary or total compensation is sort of still somewhat secretive, but whether your private part works or not is public.
Odd, I know, but yeah. I tried to examine that. I mean, I wrote about, Phil's trying to dance around. He doesn't want to say the word penis, but I'll say it for him, because I'm a Howard Stern fan, and I'm inured to this. I had prostate cancer, so I wrote about incontinence and impotence online, and you might wonder why the hell I would do that.
I was actually just trying to pitch your book.
Yeah. My wife wonders why Toilet Man is on the cover, but so I wrote about this, and why would I do that? Because I got incredible benefit out of it. People came to me with support and help that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Friends who'd had the operation 10 years before, I didn't know it had the operation. The only way that they knew that I was going to have it, and I could find out they did, would make that connection, is because I was public. And they came in and offered public advice to other people who've had this. So I found benefit. I go back to, you don't share everything, share it for a reason. Well, I shared this very personal data for a reason. But I do have my limits of privacy. Asked whether I am a believer in radical transparency, I answer that I'm still wearing clothes. You're welcome. And so I don't want to bring my family into my glass house, and that's difficult because there's transparency by association. If I tell you about my prostate cancer, you know other things about my family, including their DNA. But I do think that there's an opportunity to use openness in a lot of ways. Yet, we all have privacy. And I'm not arguing that privacy is dead. I'm not arguing that it's useless. It's very, very important. It needs protection. And the first person it needs protection from is yourself.
And some people are still making money off privacy, like Reputation Defenders. A friend of mine, Michael Furtick, started that company, and he's, I think, doing very well. Let's go to Q&A, questions.
Or arguments is fine.
Or arguments or debates, or no long statements about mind control, CIA stuff, okay? And the first 5 people who ask a question will get a free copy of Jeff's fabulous book, except the question cannot be, can I have a free copy of Jeff's book?
I'm going to borrow it. You guys can share it.
Oh, okay.
We haven't.
Oh, come on. Don't thank you very much. It's always that first moment that's most embarrassing. Oh, okay.
Or there's certain themes that you see those U.S. consumers going towards information and privacy?
I think there's a myth that ask a question, get a book. It's a beautiful thing. There's the myth of the net native young person that is wrong. Dana Boyd does a great job of beating that down, and we all have to learn and be burned online and discover that. It's obviously very much an individual choice as to what's private. My concern is that especially media and also in government, we've gotten to this mania of trying to imagine that everything is private, and that's the default for everything. Well, a society where everything is private and secret is not a society I want to live in. I want to connect with people. I want to give away free books. I want to do these things. And so that's why I wrote the book, was to try to get the other side of the conversation. Privacy and publicness are not at war. It's not binary. They depend upon each other. We are all private. We are all public. But my fear is that all we talk about now is privacy, privacy, privacy. And if we go too far with that, then we'll get nowhere in terms of trying to use these tools in new ways. So if you look at government and do not call lists work so well, they now want to do not track. Well, the truth is we already have the means not to track things. But we've demonized the notion of the cookie. We've demonized this notion of tracking. And it's all bad and all evil. And who's the fault for that? Well, the industry is. We online, both in technology and in media and in advertising agencies, are very much at fault for not being transparent about what you're doing with you and why we're doing it. And so we've made people creeped out because of that, and that's coming back to hurt us. So what I hope for is a conversation that opens up a little bit first, and then we get some idea of what people are really thinking about what they want to keep private and not.
So you were talking about filtering. I'm assuming it translates into it. One of the things that works very well is an editorial function. There are certain people out there whose opinions I respect, and they do the hard work and collect the information from it, and I trust what they take out on it. Do you see that going away over the next 5 years?
No, go ahead.
No. If I did, then I would be a fraud teaching at a journalism school. But I think it changes. I think we are no longer the gatekeeper to everything. Again, the architecture of the net enables people to share directly among themselves. We as journalists have to figure out how to add value to that. And we do still add value by adding context, vetting, asking the questions that weren't getting asked and weren't getting shared, and all these things. And we keep that. And we've got to figure out the business model to that. But no, those roles still exist.
I mean, I think one of the problems is, despite the fact that I may seem barnacled up, Jeff, with old legacy stuff, but there's been a problem in journalism for probably 30 years, and I've called it the higher calling disease. And the story I tell, which may be apocryphal, but works, is basically a reporter sitting at his or her desk, and a reader calls up and wants to talk to that person, and the reporter says, "I'm too busy doing journalism, I can't talk to the reader." We have lost our way. Journalists, not universally, not everyone, but to a large extent as a profession, have lost our way when it comes to our audience, to our readers. We don't care what they think, we don't know what they think. The best newsprint newspaper market research is terrible. It doesn't really tell you anything, it's just a hustle. So I think that we're way past due some major changes. But Jeff says in his book, not to steal his quotes from him, but he quotes.
You're aggregating.
I'm aggregating. He quotes Jay Rosen as saying, "True journalism is the conversation in the conversation the public is having with itself," which would lead one to ask, okay, then what is the role? Are you just a facilitator? Are you the platform, or do you participate? And you quote Habermas likes quality press to mediate public discussion. So there's an issue here about quality that I think is worth discussing at some other point further. But we are really, we're all getting thrown over the edge of the cliff, and we're trying to figure out what the parachute is. But if we don't look to our audience to help us find that, I'm a big believer in pro-am relationships. I'm a big believer in the relation. I think Jeff may disagree, but I think citizen journalism has been not worked in the strict sense that Dan and others envisioned it. But a relationship between citizens who are ubiquitous and who see everything and are everywhere and now have the means to record it all, and professional journalists can be very useful. And if we had more time, I'd give you some examples.
So you've touched on how there's already legislation that is on the nature of do not track and stuff. So what are effective ways for people that want to engage in open ways with companies to convince those companies that that's a good thing? If that's not the road that they're on, how do we as people, as the social group, convince them to interact with us?
I think you just do it. In my last book, I don't plug again, I told the tale of Dell hell and how I complained about my Dell computer, and Dell for the first year ignored bloggers and ignored everything. And then along came a time where they suddenly changed, where Michael Dell came back into power and he had technologists answered bloggers' problems with their computers, and they hired Lionel Menchaca as a blogger, a human voice for the company, and they started asking people what the company ought to do. And it went from worst to first, and they benefit from it. Does it solve all of Dell's problems? No. But it's changed radically the relationship that Dell has with its public. Back to Scoble. Scoble was at Microsoft. And managed to give even Microsoft a human voice and air. So I think that the one thing is that you have all the tools now in Twitter and blogs and Google Plus and Facebook to go after a company. But interestingly, in all of this, Starbucks came along and used a product from Salesforce, an ideas platform, and like Dell, and they started My Starbucks Idea. And they enabled people to not just complain, but to help solve a problem. So the little green stick you see in your cup that you can get the splash stick, that came from a customer solution, from somebody saying, I'm tired of getting my shirt splattered with coffee, and I saw this thing in Japan, why don't you do that? And they did. So what's interesting was that given the respect and the opportunity to actually contribute and collaborate, people will. And so companies have to learn that. Finally, I would also point you to the work being done by Doc Searles, co-author of the amazing Poutre Manifesto, in what he calls vendor relationship management out of Harvard Berkman Center. We heard customer relationship management as if you manage us as customers. Well, Doc wants to have the platform to enable customers to manage the vendors.
Hi, Professor.
Please, Jeff, makes me feel older than I am.
You said a number of things about the upside of sharing. I wonder if you'd be willing to be a devil's advocate and say something about the upside of privacy when he talks and come out of that in everywhere.
Absolutely. I start with the presumption that privacy is necessary, and privacy enables people to do a few things. One is to feel secure. Two is to experiment. And I'll include in privacy things like pseudonymity. When World of Warcraft parent company tried to put real names on its forums, people balked. And I understand that, because who wants to tell the world that you're an elf at night? Right? And if you want to play with your elfin side, your elfin interior, the pseudonym enables you to do that. And that's okay. Privacy enables people to connect with each other in trusted ways. So I'm all in favor of privacy. But I believe that in the privacy industrial complex that we see, that I saw at the PII conference in action, with watchdogs and regulators and legislators and consultants and chief privacy officers and companies doing this, privacy is plenty well protected. I'm just arguing we also need to look after the benefits of publicness, and I end the book with a rousing call to have a discussion, I hope rousing, about these principles of publicness, which I just want to plug for 1 minute. And they're wrong. I know I'm now turning the question back around going to publicness again. But we've got to defend these tools. And I think that there are certain rights that we have to talk about so that governments and companies don't do it for us. And these include the notion that there's a right to connect, and if you cut off my connection, Mr. Mubarak, you violated the human rights. We have a right to speak and act and assemble. We have a right, privacy is an ethic, publicness is an ethic. Our institutions should become transparent by default and secret by necessity. They're the opposite now. All bits are created equal, and we need to have the notion of net neutrality, because one bit is not free, none is free. And finally, we have to maintain this independent architecture of the net, because that is the basis of where we go. Sorry, I turned it back around.
Let's do 2 more questions, please.
My question was about transparency. It seems that transparency, almost by definition, is central power. So, how can we encourage government institutions to sort of give up that power and be transparent? That there's always going to be a gotcha aspect to it. So, how do we encourage government institutions to be transparent?
A few answers. One is WikiLeaks kind of teaches you that it's pretty damn hard to keep a secret anymore, and so you ought to operate as if you are transparent, even if you're not. But on a more positive note, more constructive note, I guess, I tell the story in the book that Beth Novick tells. Beth was the head of transparency initiatives for the Obama administration until this winter. And she, before she went there, started the peer-to-patent operation. We all know in this room, I'm sure, how screwed up the patent structure is. And it's ruled by people who don't necessarily know what they're ruling on. And so this was an experiment to get expert voices in from the outside to help the patent officers do their work. And I said to Beth, I would imagine they hate that, because this is their authority. And she said, no, they're actually very lonely jobs, and they get a lot of crap, and they want to talk with people about what they do, and they want to learn more about what they do, and they want to do a better job of it, they want to be more efficient at it. So that's an example of trying to turn government into a collaborative exercise. That the people who chose to collaborate did so because they were bringing value and benefit, that the government said, we're getting benefit out of this. So we have to find those cases where we align the interests, I think, as well as the gotchas. And the gotchas are going to exist. That's what we live to do in media, is gotcha.
I just want to say, you talk about, Julian, you talk about WikiLeaks in the book, and you've talked about it and written about it a lot. And it seems to me that in letting WikiLeaks essentially determine, or the New York Times or Bill Keller essentially determine what are the things we need to know, that makes me nervous. Mm-hmm. I think in the spirit of your notion of openness.
Yes, and the problem here is the government gave up its credibility in classifying because it classified everything. So if they say, you can't have that, it's secret, and we find out that the secrecy is actually banal, then they've lost that credibility. Whereas if we really believe they say it's secret, it ought to be secret, then I think we would all defend government against those that would leak. But we're not in that position now.
Who's making those judgments? So, one more question.
How does age figure in on privacy? Should Facebook allow under 13s to participate in age privacy?
I thought when I heard the word age, I think you're going to go for my gray hair here. prematurely, damn it. Any Grecian formula there, Phil?
Better gray than none.
Yeah, true. Interesting you asked that because COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, is now going through revisions proposed by the FTC. And I just wrote an op-ed for Time Magazine Online about this, that if you say we're going to protect the privacy of children under 13 by forbidding sites and services from doing anything remotely personally identifiable with the child, that sounds not only well-meaning, but like God's work. But there are unintended consequences to this. And I asked the FTC lawyer in a call with some privacy people about this, and said, do you have any stats on how children lie about their age? And the truth is they all lie now. On the internet, as the New Yorker said, no one knows you're a dog, but everyone is 14. Right? Everyone is above 13 because you don't want to be that. Grandparents teach their children to lie so they can get on Skype together. Right? And so no, there's no data about that. Is there any data about how many parents actually use this onerous structure of notice and consent where that you have to fax or scan a document back saying it's okay to do this educational game with my child? No. Most important, is there any research, and there is none, on the chill this puts on development online for children? The unintended consequence of COPPA, I think, is that we underserve the most important demographic to serve with this most incredible tool. One of the first sites I started online just to learn it in advance was the yuckiest site on the internet with the Liberty Science Center I know, weird. I did a weather site first. I said, give me the 5-day forecast, nothing but, and then I did the yuckiest site on the internet about cockroaches and goo and stuff for kids. Well, it was great. We sold it to Discover. It was wonderful. I love that site. It's still up, I think. You can learn all about your snot. But my company said at the time, once COPPA came out, let's not do this anymore because the risk is too high. So children are terribly underserved. So this is an example to me of the risk of overregulation to the fear of the worst case. Oh my God, someone could know the town where your child is from. Yes. And do bad things happen to children? Are they taken off the street? Yes. Do we keep them from going on the street? No, we protect them. Do they need to be on the internet and play there? I think they do. And we're going at this in a blunderbuss situation. We have to be wary of the blunderbusses that go after one thing which is good to go after, but then scattershot everything else in sight. So for example, the Australian government is looking to put filters on the internet to filter all content just to get to child porn. Well, that mechanism, that architecture is going to enable Iran and China to filter as well. And we already have laws, we already have means, we already have structures to deal with these problems. And I think we've got to change around. The person to watch on this topic is Dana Boyd, who's brilliant on this and who says that we overprotect our children. And she is a protector of children, but she believes that children have to have the ability to see the world and to touch it and experiment with it. And that the issue isn't so much regulating the children, it's regulating the adults who might do bad things.
Yeah, I think we're done. I just want to say one last thing, that I think there are exceptions to everything. And kids may be one of them, but you talk about war crime and protecting individuals are exceptions. And I would argue we had the Balco case at the Chronicle for 2 years where the government was going after our reporters to throw them in jail for 18 months, each of them, in prison for 18 months, where crime often is sometimes in the eye of the beholder in this particular case. In terms of social, there's also, I think we got engrossed in the Mother Jones controversy over live tweeting of a rape victim in Haiti, where the judgment of the immediacy of tweeting maybe they should have thought about it a little bit more. And then there's Emily Gould, who kind of went a little too far in the confessional aspect. So I think there are exceptions to everything you talk about, but the book is great, and I would recommend all of you, including those who didn't get one for free, buy it. And for those of you who got it for free, signing is extra. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you,
really
Phil.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff and Phil, for candidly and provocatively sharing your thoughts this morning. We very much appreciate it. As a small investor claims we have for you.
Swag. What's the value without swag?
Churchill Club t-shirt. We're in good health, including Skype and PII. These books are available for sale courtesy of Books 8 this morning, and Jeff has a few minutes to stick around to sign. And you with the audience. Thank you very much for coming, and have a great day.
Thank you. All right. Gotcha.